The purpose of life is to find the greatest burden you can bear and bear it. Is it possible to live a fulfilling life without the price of suffering? Should we seek happiness as a state of permanent relief, or learn to live with our burdens and call that freedom? Beyond Order doesn't begin with easy promises. It doesn't offer three-step formulas to make you feel lighthearted. On the contrary, this book posits an inconvenient truth, that the best part of your life might only begin when you stop trying to escape chaos, that order isn't a destination, but the ceaseless work of someone who refuses to give up. So, what if what you consider stable is merely a sophisticated form of impotence wrapped in habit? What if what you perceive as balance is, in fact, a prolonged state of stagnation? And what if what you call freedom turns out to be a fear of commitment? Step into each chapter as if crossing a threshold, where there's no room for anonymous drifting and no reason left to lie to yourself. Because perhaps what you've long sought isn't an answer, but a way of living that makes the question itself worthwhile. Now, let's begin summarizing this book. Rule 1. Do not disdain social institutions or creative achievements. Modern people often forget they stand on the shoulders of an invisible mountain built from the blood, sweat, tears, and wisdom of countless previous generations. They don't see this because most of what constitutes the present world has become such a solid foundation that it feels self-evident. But I, through long years of working with people slipping off the edge of life's abyss, psychiatric patients, addicts, despairing individuals, have witnessed firsthand what happens when that foundation crumbles. No family, no rules, no social order, just a black void where reason is suffocated by chaos, where freedom turns into a labyrinth. In that context, I began to realize something both simple and dangerous. The price of arrogance towards institutions is the disintegration of one's own life. When you no longer believe in social structures, that family is necessary, that laws exist for a reason, that education isn't mere indoctrination, you are, by your own hand, pulling out the beams supporting the bridge you're walking across. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying all institutions are perfect. I know well the brutality that can hide behind a mask of morality, nor do I advocate blind obedience. But I've seen too many people fall into aimlessness simply because they decided to abolish everything before understanding anything. They don't reform, they smash, and they are the first to fall. There's a subtle blind spot in how modern people evaluate society. They forget that any system large enough to maintain order, from law to culture, is a type of game, and every game, to function, needs rules and roles. If you enter a chess game only to declare the pieces meaningless, you are the one standing outside the game. You don't change it, you only become lost. Look at artists, those who embody freedom, creativity, and innovation. You'll find they adhere to certain rules more strictly than anyone. A composer must understand scales, a painter must know color theory, a writer must master language. These frameworks don't limit creativity, they are where creativity is born. Without a frame, everything is just chaos. I remember a conversation with a young student who proudly declared he had abandoned all belief systems, no longer trusting any institution. I asked him, "So, what holds you together when everything falls apart?" He was silent. And I knew he'd never thought about it, but the reality was that despite his denials, his education, his freedom of speech, his daily survival, all came from the very systems he was rejecting. This contradiction didn't anger me, it saddened me. Because if you don't know what you're standing on, when things start to shake, you'll be the first to fall. And it was in that sadness that I began to see something even more terrifying than chaos: deliberate naivety. Some young people, in the impulse of liberationist ideology, are willing to close their eyes to the complexity of the world. They dismiss history, scorn culture, mock the value systems that have forged a society stable enough for them to stand up and criticize it. They believe that simply dismantling things will allow for reconstruction. But they have never built a house, never repaired a leaky roof, never listened to the silent cracks signaling an impending collapse. I've lived long enough to understand that what endures through time isn't perfect, but necessary. Society isn't a work of art for us to judge by emotion. It is a network of countless sacrifices, adjustments, and compromises, the very thing that has kept the world from descending into anarchy. So why do some people, mostly intelligent and even well-meaning young individuals want to tear it all down because they feel imprisoned. They see rules as cages, roles as shackles, traditions as outdated. They think that by wiping the slate clean, they'll have a chance to draw something more beautiful. But no one teaches them that to write a meaningful song, you first have to learn the alphabet. The art of creation is the art of mastering limitations. Just as a violinist must constrain their fingers to absolute precise positions to create soaring melodies, social architects must accept structures as necessary conditions for any progress. No one can fly without gravity. In my experience as a therapist, I've witnessed many people consumed by what I call the fog of vague resentment, a psychological state where they don't know what they hate, only that they're not okay and the world is wrong. They begin to blame parents, teachers, jobs, government, religion, everything. But when I ask, if everything is wrong, then what is right? They can't answer. They have no viable alternative, only an unnamed fury. That's when I began to understand why defending institutions isn't an act of blind conservatism, but a moral one. I'm not saying we should keep everything as it is. I'm only saying you must understand something thoroughly before you break it. You must learn to be grateful for something before you can improve it. You must experience the burden it carries before you can declare it redundant. Gratitude isn't an emotional reaction. It's a high form of perception. When you are grateful, you no longer see life as a series of flaws to be fixed. You begin to see that, despite its imperfections, this world is still a gift, and you are the inheritor of all it bestows. Therefore, the first rule I want to give you isn't an instruction but a reminder. Before you criticize, observe. Before you break, understand. And before you create, be grateful for what has been built so you have a place to stand. If you can do that, you won't just be a free person, you'll be someone who creates freedom for others. Rule 2. Imagine who you could become and then devote yourself entirely to that goal. I once sat across from a middle-aged man. His eyes were lost, his shoulders slumped as if some invisible burden had crushed the spine of his will. He said, "I don't know what I'm living for anymore." This wasn't the statement of a weak person, but of someone who had tried to do everything society told him he should: go to college, get a job, start a family. And then, one day, he woke up in a void, realizing he had never chosen anything for himself. It was in that moment that I realized most of us live without being able to imagine who we could become in a world full of choices. It's strange how people are increasingly less daring to imagine better versions of themselves. They get drawn into jobs they don't love, maintain relationships they don't believe in, and pursue goals they don't understand why are important. It's as if they're driving a car without knowing the destination, just because everyone around them is also driving. I once asked a student, if you could become anyone with no limits, no judgment, who would you be? He fell silent. Not because he had no dreams, but because he had never allowed himself to dream. Because dreaming requires us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that our current self isn't good enough. And this is the starting point of the second rule. Imagine the person you could become, then aim for it with all the focus you can muster. Don't mistake this for delusion. You're not allowed to invent a superhuman alter ego and then sit there daydreaming. You must honestly and concretely visualize. If I change bit by bit in my habits, my thoughts, my actions, how much can I grow, and what will I do if I'm not blinded by the fear of rejection, ridicule, or failure? Let me tell you about my patients, those who once stood at the brink. I didn't tell them to dream big, because that sounds cliché. I simply asked, this week, if you did one thing that made you proud of yourself, what would it be? Sometimes the answer was heartbreakingly simple: waking up early without hating myself. But it's these small steps, these authentic visualizations of a better version, that are the beginning of great changes. You don't need to change the world, you just need to change the direction you're walking. There's a strange paradox I learned after many years of psychotherapy. People fear their own positive potential as much as they fear failure. Why? Because if you dare to believe you can be amazing, you'll have no reason to continue living a temporary life. You won't be able to blame circumstances, parents, or society. You'll be forced to take responsibility for your own life. And that responsibility, though heavy, is the only thing that helps you stand tall in life. We are not defeated by circumstances. We are defeated by a lack of direction. When you truly envision who you could become, you'll see the whole world begin to change its shape, not the external world, but the world within you. Small behaviors, daily habits, seemingly trivial choices all suddenly become meaningful. Because now you are moving towards something specific, not drifting amidst empty ideals and vague expectations. But to do that, you have to choose. And to choose, you have to reject many other things. You cannot be everyone. You cannot go in all directions at once. You have to let go of the version of you who could be anyone to become a real person. This might sound like a loss, but in reality, it is a birth. People are not born once from their mother's womb. They are born every time they choose a path and walk it with their own 2 feet. There's a concrete way to practice this. Write it down. Write down who you will become detailed, clear, without illusion. Describe the job, lifestyle, personality, and relationships you desire. Then write what you will do every day to get closer to that. This isn't a trendy self-help game, it's a moral act, because you owe yourself a life worthy of the potential you carry in your heart. Some people will mock you. They'll say you're delusional, arrogant, or naive, but you don't need to prove anything to them. They don't live your life. They don't wake up with the same emptiness in their heart every morning. They don't hear the whisper in your head every night reminding you that you weren't born to live a mediocre life. Only you know what is slowly dying within you if you don't start living authentically. You might argue that you're too old, too late, or too busy. But I've seen people start over at 50, 60, and finally find peace on a journey they thought they'd missed. What matters isn't where you stand, but where you're heading. Remember that every arrow begins by being pulled back, and sometimes the pain itself is the hand pulling you backward, not to punish, but so you have enough force to fly further. And once you've chosen your direction, don't look left or right, don't compare, don't doubt. Step forward with all the focus and discipline you can summon. You don't have to be perfect, only truly committed. Then, even if you don't reach the end point you imagined, the person you become along the way will still be a miracle. Rule 3. Do not hide unwanted things in the fog. I used to think that people fell into despair because of life's overwhelming blows, loss, betrayal, failure. But gradually, after years of conversations with fractured souls, I realized that what truly breaks us isn't pain that is too clear, but things that are unclear. What kills courage isn't harsh reality, but the smoldering fog that covers what we refuse to name. People have a strange ability to hide the things that scare them, hurt them, or make them feel inadequate into a region called the fog. There, you don't have to confront the truth that a relationship died long ago. You don't have to look directly at resentment towards your parents or jealousy of your best friend. You just quietly push them into a blurry corner and continue to be fine, or at least pretend to be. But the fog is not harmless. It has a life of its own. It moves, seeping into every crack in your mind. And one day, you realize you can't see anything anymore. No goals, no genuine emotions, no clear direction, only a vague sense of apathy. It's like driving at night without your headlights on, and you don't even remember where you intended to go. I've met many people who come to therapy not because they clearly know their problems, but because they don't know what the problem is. They just feel like everything is messed up. They aren't lying. They've just lived in the fog for so long that they themselves no longer remember what's being hidden. So why do we hide? Because we're afraid. Afraid of having to act if the truth is revealed. If you admit you hate your job, you'll be forced to consider quitting. If you realize you're deceiving your partner, you'll have to be honest and potentially face the consequences. If you know you're destroying yourself with a bad habit, you'll have no excuse to continue. And so, it's better in the unconscious mind's view to keep everything in the fog, where you don't have to take responsibility, where you're excused because, I'm not sure what's going on either. But ambiguity is a stealthy thief. It takes away what's most important: integrity, the ability to choose, and ultimately, self-respect. You can't be proud of a life you don't clearly remember how you lived. To escape the fog, you need a simple but incredibly courageous act. Write. Not write like a novelist, but write like someone rummaging through the drawers of their own memory. Write down what you know you're trying to ignore. Write about the events that shame you, the dreams you've forgotten, the people you can't forgive, even if that person is yourself. You don't need to share it with anyone, just confront it, because what isn't named will continue to control you from the shadows. And then, when you begin to name the hidden things, something strange will happen. They gradually lose their power. A fear, when dragged out of the shadows and placed under the light of reason, will no longer be as big as you imagined. a memory that once paralyzed you when you thought of it can now be seen with calmer eyes. Because what you can face is what you can begin to change. But be cautious, the fog doesn't dissipate immediately. It clings deeply in habit, in language, in the way you tell your own story. Many people live in a state of self-hypnosis. They repeat phrases like, "Everything's fine," "I must just be tired," "Nobody's perfect," as if these mantras are enough to extinguish the smoldering fire spreading through their soul. I don't deny the value of optimism, but optimism isn't denying the truth. It's how you choose to react after looking directly at the truth, with wide-open eyes and an unyielding heart. If you want to change your life, you must be brave enough to name what's wrong, even if it starts with yourself. There's a moment I'll never forget, when a middle-aged man sat silently in the therapy room, tears streaming down his cheeks. After many sessions of avoidance, he finally whispered, "I don't think I ever truly loved my son." He wasn't a bad person, he was just trapped in the role of a father, told by society that he had to be strong, had to be strict. In that role, he lost his tenderness, and he didn't dare admit it for almost 2 decades. But when he said it, without excuse, without blame, he began to be free. The truth isn't the enemy, the truth is the beginning of healing. We live in an age where keeping things to ourselves is encouraged as a noble form of endurance. But look at the consequences: widespread depression, broken relationships, anger with no clear source. All stem from a simple reality: we've hidden too much in the fog. Don't wait until you're lost to find your way. Don't wait until you're sick to seek the cause. Learn to have a dialogue with yourself honestly, regularly, courageously. And if you find yourself living in the fog, don't despair. Just a small spark, a sincere question, one honest written word is enough to open an exit. That is the deepest meaning of the third rule: don't hide unwanted things in the fog. Rule 4. Note that opportunity always lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. There's a particular kind of silence in families. A silence that doesn't come from peace, but from something no one wants to talk about. It might be the father who drinks every night, the mother who always smiles but whose eyes are dim, the child who grows up in a tidy house but without hugs. In such spaces, responsibility isn't born, and it is precisely there that opportunity begins to stir. But hardly anyone wants to look into these empty spaces. Because responsibility, instinctively, is something that makes people tired. It entails work, pressure, obligation, sacrifice. Opportunity, on the other hand, we often imagine as a brightly lit door, accompanied by triumphant music, opening onto an easy path. But no, true opportunity, the kind with the power to change a life, often lies directly beneath the mess everyone avoids. I was once invited to consult for a troubled organization, a mess no one on the management board wanted to touch. "We've tried everything," they told me, "and nothing works." When I asked where the problem started, they collectively fell silent. No one wanted to speak, no one wanted to take responsibility. But right at that dead end, where everyone turned their backs and walked away, I saw something valuable, a clear opportunity to make a difference. Not because I had a superior solution, but because if just one person was willing to step forward, the entire system would have to react. Responsibility is the gap between what is happening and what should be happening, and if you are brave enough to step into that gap, you become the bridge between those two worlds. Look at any place that is crumbling: a family, an organization, a community. You will always find abandoned responsibilities, and that means you will always find opportunities. Not opportunities for instant wealth, but opportunities for growth, for building, for becoming someone you can respect. It is precisely where they once feared the most that they found what they didn't know they were looking for: meaning. I once asked a patient, "If you could improve one small thing in your life, where would you start?" He replied after a moment of silence, "I guess I'd clean my room." I nodded, not because it was a grand solution, but because it was a sign that he was beginning to take responsibility for a piece of the world. And when you can fix one small corner, you will gradually gain the strength to impact something larger. But the sad truth is that many people turn away from responsibility, not because they are lazy, but because they once carried too great a burden when they were too young. A child forced to become an adult in the absence of parents. A wife shouldering both her own role and her partner's. A husband pressured to be strong to the point of losing emotion. And when these responsibilities are forced, people learn to avoid anything that resembles them. They don't realize that, when you are free to choose responsibility, it is no longer a burden, but a high form of power. Responsibility doesn't limit you, it unlocks untouched depths within yourself. Because only when you truly take responsibility do you begin to see yourself as a principle of change, not just a victim of circumstance. And here's the great paradox I want you to internalize. Wherever you feel anger, frustration, or helplessness, that is precisely where you are being invited to take responsibility. Negative emotions are not a curse, they are indicators. If you feel resentful when someone is treated unfairly, it might mean you have a role in correcting it. If you feel ashamed by the stagnation of a work team, perhaps you are the one who needs to ignite a new fire. Don't wait for assignments. The world doesn't operate on clear job descriptions. It operates through people who see a void and voluntarily fill it. Try to look back at your life. Where are the places you always complain? What do you feel no one does properly? The conversations you find a waste of time, the situations you keep repeating, that's where opportunity is waiting for you. But it doesn't take the shape of a reward. It takes the shape of an invitation. Do you dare to step in and make a difference? If you accept, you will have to work harder, think deeper, commit more. But in return, you will no longer feel meaningless. And meaning, as I've said many times, is the only thing that can help people overcome the inevitable suffering of life. You should start with the part you can touch. Maybe it's the meal no one has cooked, the meeting no one has led, the apology no one has dared to say, the plan no one has bothered to write. The first step is always small, but no one can take it for you. When you bear responsibility, you don't become heavier. You become steadier, like a pillar suddenly aware it was born not just to look pretty, but to support a part of this life's arch. Rule 5: don't do what you hate. There's a very specific feeling that all of us have experienced: a tightening in the stomach, a clenching in the chest, and a small voice in the head that screams, "I can't keep doing this." Sometimes it comes when you're walking into the office, starting a job you've done for years. Sometimes it comes when you sit next to someone you once loved, but now there's only silence. Or sometimes it just comes when you look in the mirror in the morning and see emptiness in your own eyes. That's not ordinary boredom, it's an alarm bell. It's the hatred not of other people, but of the actions you're forcing yourself to take, even though you know they go against what you believe in. In my years of therapy, I've met many people suffering from depression, not because they don't know how to live, but because they force themselves to live in a way they hate. A middle-aged man working in advertising told me that every time he saw campaigns he wrote, campaigns that preyed on consumer insecurity, inflating product value, he felt like he was stealing pieces of his own integrity. But he still did it for the money, for the reputation, for the responsibility. "I don't see myself doing anything explicitly wrong," he said, "but I hate myself." That's the silent tragedy many people live with their entire lives. They don't commit crimes, but they can't forgive themselves for betraying their own soul, little by little. So why do we keep doing what we hate? Because we fear the consequences of refusal. If I don't do this job, how will I live? If I leave this relationship, what will I have left? If I don't obey what society says is right, where will I go? These aren't hypothetical questions, they are reality. But the more important question is, if you continue to do what you hate, who will you become? Hate isn't an emotion to be buried, it's a signal. It tells you that something is wrong, untrue, unworthy of the person you could become. It's the primal voice of conscience, and the longer you ignore it, the more you lose the ability to distinguish right from wrong. And when you no longer know what you hate, you no longer know what you love. A young woman, intelligent and sharp, lived for many years in a legal job she didn't believe in. She told me that every time she won a case for a client she knew was in the wrong, a part of her died. But her colleagues praised her boss promoted her income was good, everyone told her she was talented. And then one day, she collapsed in the elevator. Not physically, but because her mind couldn't take it anymore. That's when she decided to stop. Not to do anything grand, just to stop doing what she hated. And when she stopped doing what she hated, there were no fireworks, no celebrations, no salvific contracts appearing, just silence and a small space in her soul that began to open. There, for the first time in years, she felt light, not because everything became easy, but because she stopped betraying herself. She began to write. No one hired her, no one paid her, but each word helped her remember what once made her heart beat faster. From that honesty, another life began. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying you have to quit your job today or abandon everything you have. What I'm saying is that if something within you is screaming because you're doing something against your values, you need to stop and listen, not to break everything, but to understand where you're fracturing and whether you can change your approach, adjust your goals, or at least begin a plan for an honorable retreat. You cannot live long if every day is an act of patient endurance against your own sense of right. Sometimes what you hate isn't the specific action, but the way you're forced to do it. A doctor might hate the hospital system that turns them into a deadline chaser instead of a healer with a heart. A teacher might hate the mechanical teaching style that stifles students' curiosity. You don't need to quit your profession, but you need to find a way to practice it without losing your soul. Start with something small. Observe each action in your day. What makes you feel dirty, even if no one sees it? What keeps you awake at night, even if outwardly you're praised as effective? What are you complicit in for the sake of security? Write it down. Not to blame, but to see clearly, to identify, to choose again with courage. And then something extraordinary will happen. When you stop doing what you hate, you will gradually find what you love. Not like a bolt of lightning, but like a seed that was already within you, now having space to sprout. Because life isn't defined by what you oppose, but by what you stand for. And you cannot stand for anything if you are still living in silent compromise with what makes you despise yourself. Rule 6. Abandon ideology. There's something truly alluring about simple ideologies. They offer a clear, easy-to-understand map with ready-made answers to life's complex questions. Why do I suffer? Because of injustice. Who caused it? The system. How to fix it? Overthrow it. Such answers often carry a moral hue, dividing the world into two clear camps: good and evil, victim and perpetrator, liberation and oppression. And it's so easy to choose a side. No need to doubt, no need for self-reflection. But life doesn't work that way. I once witnessed a passionate, intelligent young student eloquently speaking in class about the decay of current society. Everything, according to him, was wrong, from government, education, family to love and religion. He proposed a complete overhaul, replacing it with a new, fairer, purer order. I asked, "Is there any room in that for your own mistakes?" He hesitated, because ideals, once revered as absolute truth, leave no room for personal truth. And that is the problem. We turn to ideology when life becomes too chaotic. We are afraid to think for ourselves, afraid to discern what is right in this specific situation, afraid to live with paradox, with imperfection, with conflicting emotions. And we choose a ready-made template to cram everything into to avoid taking responsibility. But it is there that we sell our freedom short. I don't oppose having principles, values, or opinions, but I oppose replacing real, messy, uncertain lived experience with a piece of canned thinking, mass-produced by those who have never truly looked at the complexity of human beings. Ideologies at both ends of the political spectrum share a common structure. They simplify, they strip away depth, they turn you into the spokesperson for a thought machine rather than an individual capable of feeling, thinking, and changing. Look back at history. The greatest catastrophes of the 20th century didn't happen because people were evil, but because people believed they were doing the right thing in the name of a grand ideal. From fascism to communism, from religious extremism to consumer extremism. All began with statements that sounded logical, but no ideal is grand enough to excuse individual destruction. And this is what I want you to remember. Whenever you find yourself repeating a slogan you can't explain in detail, whenever you find yourself getting angry at someone just because they belong to the other side, whenever you find things too obvious to require further thought, that's a sign you're being consumed by ideology. And if you think you're immune to ideology just because you're intelligent, educated, and critical, think again. Ideology doesn't attack you with stupidity. It seduces you with a sense of moral superiority. It whispers, only you see the truth, only you are lucid in a blind society. And in that moment, you not only feel right, but also feel special, belonging, validated, but you are no longer yourself. I once spoke with a young woman who was lost in anger. She had no real relationships left. Friends gradually avoided her, her family was silent. Anyone who disagreed with her was labeled toxic, conservative, privileged. She lived in a closed loop where there were only people with the same voice, the same vocabulary, the same thought script. And deep down, she felt terribly alone. I asked her, when was the last time you changed your mind? She was silent for a very long time because ideology doesn't encourage you to listen. It encourages you to lecture. It doesn't invite you to ask questions. It only asks you to choose a side, and humans were not born to be mercenaries for any side. I'm not asking you to abandon ideals or to stay out of the game. I'm only advising you to live as someone ready to change when the truth comes knocking. Live as someone strong enough to admit you were wrong, brave enough to be silent when you don't understand, sincere enough to say, I am learning, not I know everything. Growth, ultimately, isn't about what beliefs you cling to, but about your willingness to update them according to reality. You want to change the world. Start by not letting the world cram you into a canned version of correct thinking. You want to create something new? Courageously step beyond smooth slogans into uncharted territory where you must find your own language. You want to be free? Then don't let yourself become a loudspeaker repeating others' ideas, even if they are labeled progressive, humanitarian, or moral. Build your opinions with real bricks and stones, from experience, from listening, from stumbling, from paradox. No one said it would be easy, but only then can you maintain your individuality in a world increasingly keen on dividing into factions rather than understanding each other. Rule 7. Work as hard as you possibly can on at least one thing and see what happens. Today, you can easily find thousands of tips on productivity. Wake up earlier, focus better, manage time more effectively. Don't procrastinate, don't get distracted. But there's one thing almost no one dares to say directly. Working your absolute hardest, truly your absolute hardest, fundamentally changes how you see the world and yourself. I'm not talking about working for money or to climb the career ladder. I'm talking about pouring all your intellect, emotion, discipline, physicality, and soul into one thing, anything, and seeing what happens if you hold nothing back. I once asked a patient struggling with aimlessness, if you could do one thing, just one, with all your ability for the next 6 months, what would you choose? He hesitated but then said, I'd relearn guitar. Not to perform, but to see how far I can go if I don't give up halfway for 6 months. For 6 months, he woke up at 5:00 a.m. every day, practicing in silence, not posting videos, not telling anyone. And by the last session of his therapy, he told me, for the first time in my life, I respect myself. That didn't come from the result, but from the commitment. You cannot have true self-respect if you've never done anything so seriously that it scares you. And you cannot find your limits if you always hold back energy, always stop halfway, always play it safe. Today's world encourages you to be a multitasker, knowing a little about everything, good at adapting. But there's one thing multitasking can never teach you: depth. And depth, in any field, is where you find yourself. Choose one thing, anything, as long as you feel something stir within your heart when you think about it. And then do it as if nothing else in the world matters as much as doing it right. Not necessarily fast, just completely. I know this doesn't sound appealing. Giving your all means being tired, being lonely, being hurt when you fail. But I've never seen anyone become a better version of themselves without going through that process. Runners, painters, scientists, parents, they all have to nod to the pain of persistence. And the strange thing is, when you truly work your hardest at something, the world begins to respond. Not immediately, not with money or fame, but with subtle changes within you. You walk more steadily, you speak less, but each word is firmer. You sleep better. You begin to realize you're no longer easily drawn into trivial matters, because you are aligning yourself with something greater than your fleeting emotions. That's a gift reserved only for those who commit. You'll see that in this process, the parts of you that were once tangled will gradually become organized. Not because you tried to untie each knot, but because when you focus on something large enough, small matters no longer have the power to control you. You don't need to pursue a grand goal, you just need to be serious about what you choose. A carpenter apprentice can find depth equal to a scientist. A full-time mother can live with dignity no less than a leader. Because nobility doesn't lie in the profession. It lies in the degree to which you are willing to take responsibility for what you're doing. And on that journey, you will begin to understand why many people are disappointed with life. They have never tried anything seriously. They dabble a little, find it not easy, then quit. They start a project, write a few pages, then stop. They enter a relationship, find it difficult, then retreat. They live their whole lives as a tourist visiting their own life. And then they wonder, why do I feel no meaning? Because meaning doesn't come to those who stand on the sidelines, it only comes to those who are willing to stand in the fire. And perhaps you won't achieve what you dreamed of. Perhaps you will fail. But remember this, you will know more clearly who you are after each time you truly exert yourself. And a person who knows themselves is a person who is no longer easily led astray by the world's noise. So choose one thing, anything, and work at it as if your life depends on it, because it truly might. Rule 8. Endeavor to make one room in your house as beautiful as possible. Years ago, I lived in a small, run-down apartment that my friends refused to visit. The ceiling was yellowed from the previous tenant's cigarette smoke. The carpet smelled of damp mold. The windows were stuck shut, frozen by the cold January wind. I often came home late, navigating through piles of scattered books and telling myself, it's just a place to sleep. I was busy, rational, had degrees, had a job, but I wasn't living. I was pretending. I was existing as if I was waiting for real life to begin somewhere else. And then one day, for a reason I don't quite understand, I decided to clean up the living room, just a small corner. I wiped away the dust, replaced the old light bulb with a soft yellow glow, hung a small, inexpensive painting, just a print I found in a used bookstore, but I liked it. I placed a chair near the window, where the afternoon light could filter through, and I sat there. In that moment, I realized I was living. Not needing a lot of money, not needing a big house, just needing a space where you can breathe, truly breathe, without feeling temporary. That's why I wrote this rule. Not for you to chase minimalism or interior design aesthetics, but because I believe you cannot reorganize your life without starting with something concrete, physical, tangible. And nothing is more intimate than the very room you live in. Choose a room, or just a corner, and pour into it all the attention, gratitude, and yearning for beauty that you possess. Don't let anyone tell you it's trivial. Beauty in its purest form is what helps people endure suffering. When you step into a place that is meticulously cared for, where every detail speaks of someone having poured love into the space, you will feel your heart settle. You will feel that you can live differently, simply because you are standing amidst something ordered, illuminated, intentional. Beauty is not a luxury, it is a spiritual necessity. And if you think you have no aesthetic sense, discard that thought. Beauty isn't something that belongs to the upper class or artists. It is something anyone can feel, with a small tremor in their heart when everything fits, when a flower is placed just right, when light falls at the perfect moment, when colors in the room harmonize as if they had been waiting for each other for a long time. Try to imagine. A child grows up in a room where everything is cared for, not with money, but with attention. Each book neatly stacked, each picture hung straight, each pillow smelling of freshly washed fabric. That child will learn that the world can be a kind place, that there is order, there is light, and that they are worthy of it. A child who grows up in clutter, dust, and cold will learn the opposite. They will assume chaos is normal, that they are not worth anyone's care. And then they will grow up with a hard-to-fill hole in their heart, a feeling of being abandoned by the world itself. You cannot fix all the wrongs out there, but you can create a small room where goodness is preserved. A room like a silent manifesto. I choose beauty over disorder. I choose light over darkness. I choose intention over surrender. And you don't need anyone's permission, you just need to start. Clean your desk. Place a vase of flowers, pin up a favorite photo, open the curtains to let in the sun, light a candle, mop the floor. And every time you do something small like that, tell yourself, this is a moral act, because preserving beauty in a world that is increasingly ugly and rough is a moral act. If you are lost, if your life feels chaotic, if you don't know where to start, make one room beautiful. Any room you live in. Don't ask if it will solve the problem. It won't solve it. It will turn you into the kind of person who can solve it. And that is the true starting point. Live in beauty, even if the world outside is chaotic. Build a sanctuary not to escape, but to recharge your faith. Do it as a silent affirmation. I deserve a life with order, with light, and with love. Rule 9. If old memories still make you cry, write them down carefully and completely. This rule touches the deepest layers of the soul, where unresolved memories silently shape who we are every day. I invite you to step in with me. There are memories that don't age with time. They lie there, silent, motionless, like a cut under the skin that has healed but still aches every time it's touched. You might be drinking coffee, watching a movie, or listening to a song, and suddenly it rushes back, that image, that voice, that feeling, and you find yourself quiet, as if you've just returned to being a child enduring something that no one around them realizes. We think that time will heal, but time doesn't heal what has never been named. The memories that bring tears to your eyes after 10, 20 years, it's not because you're weak, it's because you've never fully told that story. Writing is a form of revisiting, but not a glance. It's a deep look, opening each drawer of memory, pulling out the fragments you've hidden because they were too heavy. And when you write, you place yourself in the position of a storyteller. Not just a victim, you attach names, times, contexts to what was once chaos. You bring order, you bring light, and from that, you begin to reclaim power over your own past. I once worked with a woman who carried a painful childhood memory, being forgotten by her mother in a supermarket. She was only a 6-year-old girl then, and for decades afterward, every time she entered a crowded place, she felt like she was dissolving. She didn't clearly remember what happened, only an unnamed sense of panic. Until one evening, she decided to write down every detail she could remember and didn't stop until the story was complete. She didn't sugarcoat, didn't blame, just told the truth. And then a miracle happened. She began to dream of herself in the supermarket, but this time she was holding that 6-year-old child. She hugged her, let her out, and said, "It's okay now." Some pains cannot be healed by comforting words or psychological analysis. They can only be resolved when we dare to step back into the old room where the memory was forgotten and light a lamp. When you write down a painful memory, you don't just record what happened, you restructure it. You allow yourself to look back with the eyes of an adult, no longer the child who was once hurt. You might realize that the person who hurt you was also a person who was hurting. You might see how strong you were to survive it. You might, for the first time, truly have compassion for yourself. And you might write through tears. But those are tears with purpose, not of despair, but of liberation. Writing helps you break through internal isolation. For years, you've lived with an untold story, like someone carrying a hidden wound. No one knows to empathize. When you write, you acknowledge your own existence within that pain. And that, in itself, is the first step of healing. I'm not saying all memories need to be exposed to the public. Many stories are private and should remain private. But you cannot continue to live in the light if you let the past cast a shadow over you like an unnamed ghost. Light only comes when you dare to look, even if only in silence. I once advised a patient to try writing down the memory of the night her parents had a fierce argument when she was only 8. She still remembered the shouting, the sound of a breaking cup, and the moment she huddled in the closet to hide, trembling. She had never told anyone about it, but as she wrote, she began to see something she had never realized. Despite being paralyzed with fear, she pulled her younger sister into the closet with her and held her tight all night. She hadn't just been a victim, she was a protector. And when she saw that, something within her clicked open like a door to the light. Write, it doesn't need to be good, it doesn't need to be grammatically correct, just be honest. Write to understand, write to bear witness to the pain you once experienced, write to then let it go. Tears aren't just sadness. Sometimes they are a sign that a layer of memory is opening up for healing. Rule 10. Plan and strive to maintain romance in your relationship. When people fall in love, they don't need to remind each other to plan for their affection. Everything comes naturally. Sweet messages, aimless strolls, a gentle touch on the shoulder in a crowd, a long gaze without words. Love at that point is like a newly kindled flame, small, fragile, but warm enough to make the entire outside world fade away. And then life begins to intrude. Bills, work, children, responsibilities, exhaustion. And gradually, the things that once came naturally now need to be scheduled. A date night has to be pushed to next week. A hug is forgotten when rushing out the door. The words, "you're beautiful," disappear amidst countless conversations about who takes the kids to school, who does the dishes, who calls the washing machine repairman. That's when people start to think, perhaps love has ended. But love doesn't end on its own. It gradually depletes when not nurtured. And the frightening thing is, you might still live with that person, still share dinner, still sleep in the same bed, but no longer truly meet each other. I once spoke with a man who had been married for over 15 years. He told me, "I still love my wife, but now every time we talk, I feel like I'm in a meeting." I asked him, "When was the last time you proactively planned an evening just for the two of you?" He was silent for a long time. That's the problem. People forget that love is also a form of work. the work of maintaining beauty, vitality, and the sacred between two people. You might plan your budget, your vacation, your self-development. But do you have a plan for keeping love fresh? If you don't actively create romantic moments, life will fill them with moments of irritation. Romance isn't roses every day. It's looking at the other person and saying, I still want you to feel desired. It's taking time, however short, to ask, what has made you happiest lately? It's an unprompted touch of the hand while washing vegetables, a simple text, I'm thinking of you, in the middle of the workday. And the astonishing thing is, if just one person starts, the atmosphere will change. Love doesn't grow through intense emotions, but through small actions, repeated with intention and respect. It doesn't last because two people are so compatible, but because they are willing to work together every day. Imagine love as a garden. If you only plant trees but don't water, weed, or fertilize, no matter how strong the trees are, they will wither. And if you neglect it for too long, there will come a time when you no longer recognize the original garden, only a messy tangle of weeds that makes you no longer want to step inside. And the most heartbreaking thing is that many people only realize the value of romance when it has withdrawn. They suddenly remember the hugs that were once so easily given, the conversations that used to stretch late into the night, the times they laughed together at something silly. But now, all of that has been replaced by silence, or worse, by weary resignation. That's not because they no longer love each other, but because they stopped actively protecting that love. Make a plan. It doesn't have to be anything grand. One evening a week reserved just for the two of you, no phones, no work. A sincere thank you whenever your partner does something small for you. A slightly longer gaze when saying goodbye. A gesture that makes the other person feel seen. And if you find it feels awkward, remember that anything that was once natural, if left undone for too long, will become unfamiliar. And there's nothing wrong with relearning how to love. You once knew how. Now you just need to relearn with the spirit of an adult, no longer waiting for feelings to lead the way, but willing to act so that feelings can return. And then, if you persevere, you will see that love doesn't disappear. It's just waiting for you to remember how to ignite it. Rule 11. Don't allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. Resentment doesn't appear like a storm. It arrives silently, like water seeping through a crack. At first, it's just a small dissatisfaction. You feel unrecognized, unfairly treated, or not loved correctly. You don't react, you swallow it, you force a smile, and then you think, okay, we'll see. That's when resentment begins to take root. I once spoke with a man who had lived for 30 years in a marriage where he felt he was the only one trying. He still cared for his family, still went to work, still provided fully, but in his eyes was a darkness I was familiar with. Prolonged suppression turned into bitterness. He no longer spoke to his wife with words, but with coldness. He no longer expressed sadness, but sarcasm. And then he asked me, what am I doing wrong? Resentment doesn't make you strong, it makes you shrivel inside. And from there, you begin to hurt others with the very thing you believe they did to you. Deceit is similar. It begins when you don't dare to tell the truth for fear of hurting someone. Then you tell half-truths. Then you start living as if what's false is true, just to keep things smooth. And at some point, you can no longer distinguish between truth and falsehood. You play the role of someone who's fine, someone moral, someone reasonable. While deep down, you are being pushed further and further away from yourself. I once treated a woman who was a teacher, respected by students and parents, but always felt empty. She said, I don't know who I am anymore. I only know how to be who others expect me to be. She lived a series of roles, and every role was successful except the role of me. Deceit isn't just lying to others. It's when you start lying to yourself that you're fine, that you don't need anything more, that you're happy with a life that is no longer honest. And finally, arrogance. It's often disguised as confidence, but true confidence always comes with humility. Only the weak need to puff themselves up to prove their strength. Those who are truly steady are silent because they don't need anyone's validation. Arrogance is when you stop learning from others, when you think you're so right that you can no longer hear an opposing viewpoint. It's when you speak more than you listen. And worse, it's when you start to believe you are superior, not because you are good, but because you perceive others as inferior. Arrogance, if left unchecked, will cause you to lose the ability to learn. You will no longer find anyone valuable enough to listen to, nothing worth doubting your own beliefs. And from there, you will slide into a state more dangerous than ignorance, complacent ignorance. You think you are in control of your life, but in reality, you are trapping yourself in a sealed box where there's no ventilation, no echoes from the outside world. I once met a man who was a genius in college. He succeeded very early, was recognized, and from then on lived as if every decision he made was correct. He no longer asked anyone, no longer listened to anyone. At one point, his career fractured, not because of a lack of talent, but because he no longer knew how to collaborate. He couldn't apologize, couldn't admit fault, and ultimately couldn't save himself from a consequence everyone else saw coming except him. Arrogance, resentment, and deceit. These three things are like a toxic alliance in the mind. They feed on each other. You resent, so you start to deceive to avoid conflict. You deceive for too long, so you become arrogant to hide the emptiness. You are arrogant, so you never truly deal with the resentment. And so you cycle endlessly, unable to escape. To break this cycle, you need to start with the courage to face yourself. Look directly at where you resent someone and ask, have I spoken out? Have I acted honestly? Am I upholding fairness for the other person, or do I just want to punish them? Write it down, say it out loud, or at least acknowledge it in your heart. Then look to see if you are lying about anything. A desire you hide, a truth you fear to accept, a behavior you are justifying. Do the hardest thing, tell the truth, at least to yourself. And finally ask, am I the center of the world? Do I think only I am right? Am I judging others too quickly? These questions are not pleasant, but only when you dare to ask them can you prevent those three monsters from gnawing at your spiritual life every day. Keep your heart pure, not through textbook morality, but through mindfulness. Don't let yourself become bitter, artificial, or someone who always thinks they are above others. Be the person who can look in the mirror every morning and say, I am not perfect, but I am living authentically. Rule 12, be grateful even when you are suffering. Suffering discriminates against no one. No one lives without loss, disappointment, betrayal, or being knocked down. The world does not promise you that if you are good, you will be treated well. Life does not sign a contract saying that if you try hard, everything will go smoothly. And precisely because of this, there are times when gratitude becomes the most irrational thing a person can feel. But it is also in those very moments, if you can maintain gratitude, even if it's just a tiny glimmer, that you are holding onto one of the most powerful and precious capacities a human being can possess. I'm not talking about be positive, everything happens for a reason, kind of gratitude. Those phrases, when spoken to someone suffering, only make them feel more alone. I'm talking about a courageous gratitude that doesn't deny the pain, but also doesn't let the pain consume you. I once spoke with a woman who lost her child. She didn't cry much, she said very little. But in one session, she uttered a sentence I will never forget. I don't know why it happened, but I am grateful that I got to be her mother, even if only for a few years. There was nothing easy in that statement. It was gratitude drawn from the depths of despair, like a faint light flickering in a completely dark room. We don't get to choose everything that happens to us, but we do get to choose how we respond. And how we respond will shape who we become. Try to reflect on your life. Surely there have been times when you couldn't imagine you would get through. Yet here you are, still breathing, still going on. Perhaps with many scars, but also with many lessons that only pain could teach. Gratitude doesn't deny the fact that life can be cruel. It merely says that despite that, there is still something worth holding on to. A friend, a gentle sunny morning, a word that touched your heart, a song that saved you on a night you thought you couldn't go on. Start with those things. Small, close, real. Gratitude isn't a pleasant emotion. It's a disciplined act, a conscious choice, repeated every day. Especially on days when there's nothing to feel grateful for. You wake up, your mood empty, your head heavy as lead with no motivation. But you still choose to carefully fold your blanket, brew a hot cup of coffee, look out the window, and silently tell yourself, perhaps today will just be another ordinary day, but I am still here, and that means I still have a chance to do something better. That is gratitude, humble, quiet, needing no audience, but also the strength that keeps people from sliding into despair. I once treated a man who, due to an accident, lost his ability to walk. From an active athlete, he became dependent on a wheelchair. For the first 6 months, he was engulfed in depression and anger. But then, from an article he read, not an inspirational piece, but a diary entry from a soldier who had lost both arms, he began to rewrite his life story. Every morning, he wrote down 3 small things he was grateful for. At first, it was just, "I can shave myself," or "It's not raining." After a few months, he told me, "I'm not back to my old self, but I feel more authentically alive." You can hurt, you can lose, but don't lose gratitude. Because when that happens, you have nothing left to fight the darkness. Thank the good when it comes, however small. Thank the bad if it teaches you to clearly see what is unacceptable. Thank kind people, even if they only crossed your path once. Thank yourself for still trying to understand, still holding on. You may not believe in religion, but I think all of us can believe in the sacredness of the moment of being truly alive. Authentically, not artificially, not bitterly, not escaping. And gratitude is the quietest prayer, yet also the most powerful. Thank you for accompanying me to the very last words of Beyond Order. If you are still here, perhaps it's not because you found answers to all your problems, but because, like me, you feel that this world, though complex, chaotic, and sometimes cruel, is still worth finding a way to live with dignity, depth, and without betraying yourself. I don't believe that a book, however meticulously written, can guide someone's entire life. But I do believe that if a book can sit quietly with you through unspoken moments, it has done the most important thing. It has become a companion, not a preacher. If Beyond Order has achieved that, even in a small way, I invite you to share your feelings, not to evaluate me, but to dialogue with yourself. Which rule made you pause longer? Which question made you uncomfortable or resonated with you? What in the book did you deeply agree with? What would you like to challenge? Speak out. Not because the world needs your opinion, but because you need to hear your own voice expressed clearly and with weight. And if you have a book secretly waiting to be heard, a work that once confused you, moved you, or made you feel understood, please suggest it. I am always ready to embark on new journeys with you, as long as that journey demands courage, quiet reflection, and an intellect that does not accept ease. We don't read to escape reality. We read to gain more language to name the world, to understand others a little more, and to understand ourselves more deeply. Thank you for listening to my story.